Packers versus Bears, the oldest hatred in professional football. The rivalry between the Green Bay Packers and the Chicago Bears is the oldest and most storied in the National Football League, a blood feud that has been raging for over a century. Dating back to 1921, when the Bears were known as the Chicago Staleys, this rivalry has been played over 200 times, more than any other matchup in NFL history. This is not just a football game, it is a clash of cultures between two cities that could not be more different in character and identity. Green Bay is a small blue-collar town of just over 100,000 people that is defined entirely by its football team. The Packers are not just the heart and soul of the community, they are the community. The team is owned by the fans themselves, making it the only publicly owned franchise in major professional sports. The entire city shuts down on game days, and the waiting list for season tickets is over 130,000 names long, with an estimated wait time of over 30 years. Chicago, on the other hand, is a sprawling metropolis of nearly 3 million people with a rich history that extends far beyond football. The Bears are important to the city, but they are just one part of a much larger cultural tapestry. The rivalry has been defined by iconic players and coaches throughout history. In the early days, it was a battle between George Halas, the founder and coach of the Bears known as Papa Bear, and Curly Lambeau, the founder and coach of the Packers. These two men were not just coaches, they were the architects of their franchises and the NFL itself. Their personal animosity toward each other helped fuel the rivalry and set the tone for generations of players and fans. Halas was known for his fiery temper and his willingness to do whatever it took to win, while Lambeau was more of a gentleman but equally competitive and determined to build a championship program in tiny Green Bay. The geographical proximity of the two cities has always intensified the rivalry. Green Bay and Chicago are separated by just 200 miles along Interstate 94, making it easy for fans to travel to away games and creating a natural division of loyalties throughout Wisconsin and northern Illinois. Many families are split down the middle, with some members supporting the Packers and others rooting for the Bears, leading to heated dinner table discussions and friendly wagers that can last for decades. In the 1960s, the rivalry reached new heights with Vince Lombardi's Packers dynasty, winning 5 NFL championships in 7 years, including the first 2 Super Bowls. Lombardi's teams were built on precision, discipline, and toughness that became known as the Packer Way. The Bears, meanwhile, were struggling through one of the worst periods in their history, winning just 1 playoff game during the entire decade. Lombardi's famous quote that "winning isn't everything, it's the only thing" became a rallying cry for Packers fans and a source of irritation for their Chicago counterparts. The 1980s saw the pendulum swing back to Chicago, with Mike Ditka's 1985 Bears capturing the nation's imagination with their dominant defense and larger-than-life personalities. The 46 defense, coordinated by Buddy Ryan, was revolutionary, featuring players like Mike Singletary, Richard Dent, and William the Refrigerator Perry, who became household names. The Bears' Super Bowl Shuffle video and their brash, confident attitude made them must-see television, while the Packers were mired in mediocrity under a succession of coaches who couldn't recapture the magic of the Lombardi era. The modern era has been defined by quarterback play, with Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers leading the Packers to sustained success that has frustrated Bears fans for decades. Favre, the gunslinging quarterback from Mississippi, brought a swagger and confidence to Green Bay that had been missing for years. His ability to make spectacular throws while also throwing interceptions at the worst possible moments made him both beloved and maddening to Packers fans. Favre's 3 consecutive MVP awards from 1995 to 1997 coincided with the Bears' continued struggles to find a franchise quarterback, creating another layer of frustration for Chicago supporters. Memorable moments include the 1980 game where Packers kicker Chester Marcole caught his own blocked field goal and ran it in for a game-winning touchdown in overtime, a play so bizarre that it took officials several minutes to sort out what had happened. The 2010 NFC Championship game at Soldier Field saw Aaron Rodgers lead the Packers to a 21-14 victory in front of a hostile Chicago crowd, with the win sending Green Bay to Super Bowl 45, where they would defeat the Pittsburgh Steelers. The weather has always been a factor in this rivalry, with games played in sub-zero temperatures at Lambeau Field becoming legendary tests of endurance for both players and fans. Cowboys vs. 49ers, America's team versus the dynasty. The rivalry between the Dallas Cowboys and San Francisco 49ers is a battle between two of the most successful franchises in NFL history, defined by high-stakes playoff games that produced some of the most memorable moments in sports history. This rivalry is not based on geography, but on championship aspirations, a shared history of greatness, and a mutual respect earned through decades of playoff battles that often determined who would represent the NFC in the Super Bowl. The rivalry began in the 1970s when the Cowboys, led by coach Tom Landry and quarterback Roger Staubach, were known as America's team, a nickname given by NFL films that reflected their national popularity and status as the most recognizable franchise in professional sports. The Cowboys had a distinctive style both on and off the field, with their iconic star logo, their cheerleaders, and their state-of-the-art stadium that was unlike anything else in the league. Tom Landry's stoic demeanor on the sideline, always wearing his signature fedora, became an iconic image that represented the Cowboys' professionalism and precision. The 49ers were a struggling franchise that had never won a championship and had been one of the worst teams in the league for most of their existence. They were known more for their futility than their success, playing in a small, outdated stadium that was a far cry from the glamour and glitz of Dallas. But everything began to change in the late 1970s with the arrival of coach Bill Walsh and the implementation of his revolutionary West Coast offense. Walsh's system emphasized short, precise passes that could be completed quickly, allowing smaller, quicker receivers to thrive and reducing the importance of having a strong-armed quarterback. The Cowboys won their first 3 playoff meetings against the 49ers, establishing themselves as the dominant force in the early years of the rivalry. But everything changed with the 1981 NFC Championship game and the catch. With the 49ers trailing 27-21 and facing 3rd and 3 from the Cowboys' 6-yard line with less than a minute remaining, Joe Montana rolled right, scrambled to avoid the rush, and threw a high pass toward the back corner of the end zone. Dwight Clark made a leaping grab that has become known simply as the catch, giving the 49ers a 28-27 victory and sending them to their first Super Bowl. The catch was more than just a great play, it was a symbolic passing of the torch from one dynasty to another. The Cowboys had been the team of the 1970s, but the 1980s would belong to the 49ers. Walsh's West Coast offense revolutionized the way the game was played and helped usher in the modern era of NFL football. Montana became the face of the franchise, leading the 49ers to 4 Super Bowl victories during the decade and establishing himself as one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. The rivalry reached its peak in the 1990s when the teams met in 3 consecutive NFC Championship games from 1992 to 1994. These games were brutal, physical affairs filled with trash talk, big hits, and high drama. The Cowboys, led by the triplets of Troy Aikman, Emmitt Smith, and Michael Irvin, won the first 2 meetings in 1992 and 1993, with victories that were as much about intimidation and physicality as they were about talent and execution. The Cowboys' offensive line, anchored by players like Mark Stepnoski and Eric Williams, was considered one of the most dominant units in NFL history. The 1994 NFC Championship game was perhaps the most memorable of the 3, played at Candlestick Park with Steve Young finally stepping out of Montana's shadow. Young had been living in Montana's legacy for years and was desperate to win a championship of his own. The 49ers jumped out to an early lead and never looked back, winning 38-28 in a game that showcased Young's incredible arm talent and mobility. Young threw for 293 yards and 3 touchdowns, finally proving he could lead the 49ers to the promised land and setting up their victory over the San Diego Chargers in Super Bowl 29. Steelers vs. Ravens, the blood feud of the AFC North. The rivalry between the Pittsburgh Steelers and Baltimore Ravens is the most intense and physical rivalry in the modern NFL. built on mutual hatred, smash-mouth football, and brutal, low-scoring games that are not for the faint of heart. This rivalry began in 1996 when the Cleveland Browns moved to Baltimore and became the Ravens, transferring decades of hatred between Pittsburgh and Cleveland to the new franchise in Maryland. Both teams share a blue-collar identity that is reflected in their physical, defensive style of play. The cities of Pittsburgh and Baltimore are located just a few hours apart along Interstate 70, and they share similar industrial backgrounds as former steel and shipping towns that have had to reinvent themselves in the post-industrial era. Their football teams serve as sources of pride and identity for communities that have faced economic challenges and social changes over the decades. The Steelers have the Steel Curtain tradition dating back to the 1970s with legendary players like Mean Joe Green, Jack Lambert, Jack Ham, and Mel Blount. This defensive tradition continued into the modern era with players like Troy Polamalu, James Harrison, and T.J. Watt, carrying on the legacy of hard-hitting, intimidating defense. The Ravens built their identity around defense from their inception, with players like Ray Lewis, Ed Reed, and Terrell Suggs becoming the faces of the franchise and leaders of units known for their ferocity and ability to create turnovers. Ray Lewis was the heart and soul of the Ravens' defense for 17 seasons, a linebacker who was as much a spiritual leader as he was a football player. Lewis was known for his emotional pregame speeches that could bring teammates to tears, his bone-crushing hits that could change the momentum of games, and his ability to rally his team in the biggest moments. His pregame dance became legendary, and his battles with Steelers players like Jerome Bettis, Hines Ward, and Ben Roethlisberger became the stuff of legend, with each hit and tackle carrying the weight of the entire rivalry. Ed Reed was perhaps the most talented safety in NFL history, a player who could change the course of a game with a single interception. Reed had an uncanny ability to read quarterbacks and anticipate where the ball was going, turning interceptions into an art form. His 107-yard interception return for a touchdown against the Philadelphia Eagles in 2004 remains the longest play in NFL history, and his battles with Steelers quarterbacks became a central part of the rivalry. Reed was particularly effective against Ben Roethlisberger, intercepting him 7 times in their career matchups and returning 2 of those interceptions for touchdowns. The 2008 AFC Championship game was perhaps the most brutal game in rivalry history, a defensive struggle played in frigid conditions at Heinz Field that was decided by a late touchdown pass from Joe Flacco to Anquan Boldin. The game featured the kind of bone-crushing hits and defensive plays that have come to define this rivalry, with both teams' defenses dominating their respective offenses for most of the contest. The 2010 divisional playoff game saw one of the most memorable comebacks in rivalry history, with the Steelers overcoming a 21-7 halftime deficit to win 31-24. Ben Roethlisberger threw for 226 yards and 3 touchdowns in the second half, including the game-winning touchdown pass to Antonio Brown with just over 2 minutes remaining. The victory sent the Steelers to the AFC Championship game and eventually to Super Bowl 45, but it was the way they won that made the game so memorable, showing the kind of resilience and toughness that has come to define their franchise. Eagles versus Cowboys, the NFC East war of words and hatred. The rivalry between the Philadelphia Eagles and Dallas Cowboys is one of the most bitter rivalries in sports, fueled by deep animosity between two cities representing completely different visions of American culture and identity. Philadelphia is gritty and blue-collar with a perpetual chip on its shoulder, a place where hard work and authenticity are valued above all else, and where fans have little patience for pretension or false promises. Dallas, on the other hand, is flashy and sees itself as the center of the universe, a place where image and style often matter more than substance, and where success is expected rather than earned. The rivalry began in the 1960s when Dallas entered the league as an expansion team and was placed in the same division as Philadelphia. The two teams quickly became bitter rivals, with their games often marked by brawls, cheap shots, and a level of animosity that was unusual even for the NFL. The contrasting personalities of the two franchises intensified the hatred. The The Cowboys were America's team with professionalism and precision under Tom Landry, while the Eagles were known for toughness, grit, and their passionate, sometimes unruly fan base that has become legendary throughout the sports world. Philadelphia fans are renowned for their intensity and their willingness to boo their own players if they don't meet expectations. The city's sports fans have a reputation for being among the most knowledgeable and demanding in the country, and they have little patience for players or teams that don't give maximum effort. This creates an atmosphere at Lincoln Financial Field that is both intimidating for visiting teams and inspiring for the home team, but it also means that Eagles players must constantly prove themselves to their own supporters. The rivalry peaked in the 1980s when both teams were perennial contenders and their games often had playoff implications that could determine division championships and postseason seeding. The 1980 NFC Championship game at Veterans Stadium saw the Eagles defeat the Cowboys 20-7 in frigid conditions that made the game as much about surviving the elements as playing football. The victory sent Philadelphia to their first Super Bowl, where they would lose to the Oakland Raiders, but beating their hated rivals to get there made the achievement even sweeter for Eagles fans. Buddy Ryan became Eagles head coach in 1986, bringing a brash, confrontational style that was perfectly suited to the rivalry with Dallas. Ryan was known for his aggressive defensive schemes that featured exotic blitzes and coverage packages designed to confuse opposing quarterbacks, and his willingness to speak his mind, regardless of the consequences, made him a perfect fit for Philadelphia's no-nonsense culture. Ryan openly despised the Cowboys and their coach Tom Landry, making no secret of his desire to embarrass them whenever possible and often making inflammatory comments to the media that would fuel the fire of the rivalry. Ryan's Eagles were built around defense, with players like Reggie White, Jerome Brown, Clyde Simmons, and Andre Waters forming one of the most intimidating units in the league. White, known as the Minister of Defense, was perhaps the most dominant pass rusher of his era, combining incredible speed and strength with a relentless motor that made him nearly impossible to block one-on-one. His battles with Cowboys offensive linemen became legendary, and his ability to single-handedly disrupt Dallas's offensive game plans was a key factor in the Eagles' success during the Ryan era. The infamous Bounty Bowl games of 1989 were the low point of the rivalry, with accusations flying that the Eagles had put bounties on Cowboys players and were deliberately trying to injure their opponents. The first game, played in Philadelphia on Thanksgiving Day, was a brutal affair that saw Cowboys kicker Luis Zendejas knocked out of the game by a vicious hit from Eagles safety Andre Waters. The hit was clearly intentional and led to accusations that Philadelphia was trying to hurt Dallas players rather than simply beat them. The modern era has been defined by Dallas's 1990s dynasty with 3 Super Bowl victories, while Philadelphia struggled to match their success, adding another layer of frustration to this bitter rivalry. The Cowboys' success during this period, combined with their continued claims to be America's team, has only intensified the hatred that Eagles fans feel toward their division rivals. Patriots versus Colts, the Manning versus Brady decade. The rivalry between the New England Patriots and Indianapolis Colts defined the NFL for nearly 2 decades, serving as the premier quarterback matchup between Tom Brady and Peyton Manning. This was not a rivalry built on geography or divisional hatred, but rather on the clash between 2 of the greatest quarterbacks in history and their contrasting styles, personalities, and approaches to the game. The rivalry began in earnest in 2001 when Tom Brady took over as Patriots starter following an injury to Drew Bledsoe. The contrast between Brady and Manning was stark in almost every way. Manning was the polished, pedigreed quarterback who had been groomed for greatness since childhood, the son of former NFL quarterback Archie Manning, who had been the first overall pick in the 1998 draft. Brady, meanwhile, was the overlooked 6th-round pick from the University of Michigan who had to fight for everything he achieved and was not even expected to make the Patriots roster as a rookie. Their first memorable meeting was the 2003 AFC Championship game, when the Patriots defeated the Colts 24-14 in brutal conditions at Gillette Stadium. The game was played in a snowstorm with temperatures well below freezing, and the Patriots' defense, led by Ty Law and Rodney Harrison, harassed Manning all day, intercepting him 4 times and holding the Colts' high-powered offense to just 14 points. The victory established the Patriots' early dominance in the rivalry and sent them to Super Bowl 38. The 2004 divisional playoff became known as the Snow Bowl because of the conditions outside Gillette Stadium, though inside the game was all about the Patriots' defensive dominance. They used a physical, aggressive style of play that disrupted the Colts' timing and rhythm, holding them to just 3 points through 3 quarters in a 20-3 victory. The Patriots intercepted Manning 3 times, including a crucial pick six by Rodney Harrison that sealed the victory and sent New England to their third Super Bowl in 4 years. Manning finally got his revenge in the 2006 AFC Championship game, overcoming an 18-point deficit to defeat the Patriots 38-34 in one of the greatest comebacks in playoff history. The game was played at the RCA Dome in Indianapolis, and the atmosphere was electric from the opening kickoff. Manning completed the comeback with a touchdown pass to Reggie Wayne with just over a minute remaining, sending the Colts to Super Bowl 41, where they would defeat the Chicago Bears for Manning's first championship. The rivalry continued even after Manning moved to Denver in 2012, with their 2013 meeting showcasing Manning's incredible preparation and football IQ as his Broncos defeated Brady's Patriots 26-16. Manning completed 32 of 43 passes for 400 yards, exploiting the Patriots' defensive weaknesses with surgical precision and demonstrating the chess match that made their rivalry so compelling for football fans and analysts alike. Giants vs. Cowboys, the NFC East blood feud. The rivalry between the New York Giants and Dallas Cowboys is one of the most intense rivalries in the NFC East. Built on decades of memorable games, controversial moments, and mutual disrespect between two of the NFL's most storied franchises. Since Dallas joined the league in 1960 and was placed in the same division as New York, their games have often carried significant playoff implications and division championship consequences that have shaped the landscape of the NFC for generations. The rivalry intensified during the 1980s and 1990s when both teams were consistently competitive and their meetings often determined division championships. The Giants were led by coach Bill Parcells, a tough, no-nonsense leader who demanded excellence from his players and was known for his ability to get the most out of his roster. The Giants featured a dominant defense anchored by Lawrence Taylor, widely considered the greatest defensive player in NFL history, who revolutionized the linebacker position with his speed, power, and relentless pursuit of quarterbacks. Taylor's impact on the game cannot be overstated. He was the first defensive player to be named NFL MVP since 1971, and his presence on the field forced opposing teams to completely alter their offensive game plans. His battles with Cowboys offensive linemen became legendary, and his ability to single-handedly disrupt Dallas's offensive rhythm was a key factor in the Giants' success during the 1980s. Taylor's off-field struggles with substance abuse added another layer of drama to his story, but on the field he was simply unstoppable. The Cowboys went through a period of transition in the 1980s as the Tom Landry era came to an end, but the hiring of Jimmy Johnson as head coach in 1989 marked the beginning of a new era in Dallas. Johnson brought with him a young, talented roster that included quarterback Troy Aikman, running back Emmitt Smith, and wide receiver Michael Irvin, who became known as the Triplets and formed the core of one of the greatest teams in NFL history. One memorable game came in 1993 during Monday Night Football with huge NFC East implications, as both teams were fighting for playoff positioning late in the season. The Cowboys were in the midst of their championship run, having won the Super Bowl the previous season, while the Giants were trying to prove they could still compete with their division rivals. Dallas won 16-13 on a late Eddie Murray field goal in a defensive struggle that showcased the physical, hard-hitting nature of this rivalry. The 2007 season provided another classic chapter when the teams met twice in the final month of the regular season, with the Cowboys having already clinched the NFC's top seed and resting many of their starters in the second meeting. But the Giants used the opportunity to build momentum for what would become an incredible playoff run that few saw coming. That momentum carried into the divisional round where the Giants upset the heavily favored Cowboys 21-17 with their defense led by Michael Strahan and Osi Umenyiora harassing Tony Romo all day and forcing him into several crucial mistakes. The victory was particularly sweet for Giants fans because it came against a Cowboys team that had been heavily favored and had talked openly about their Super Bowl aspirations throughout the season. The Giants would go on to defeat the Green Bay Packers in the NFC Championship game and then shock the previously undefeated New England Patriots in Super Bowl 42, completing one of the greatest upsets in sports history and adding another chapter to their rivalry with Dallas.